Hey guys, hope the audio is working on this. Just wanted to make a video on some recent experiences that I've been having regarding Seagate SSHDs, which are the solid state hybrid drives, which basically, in sense, have a SSD or a solid state NAND flash drive strapped to the standard platted disk storage drive, and obviously they work like a little cache that and the solid state cache it sort of acts like RAM, so that your programs and things that you load are actually loaded from the RAM. But in the event that you've got a power loss, because it's an SSD, that data effectively is safe and secure on the SSD portion of the cache. The drives that Seagate currently have, they come in 1 terabyte, 2 terabyte. I believe there's a 3 terabyte, and I've seen the 4 terabyte. These drives, they tend to have an 8 gigabyte of NAND SSD flash, and as I've gone through 3 drives up to now, and they've failed in less than 24 hours. It is very possible I just ended up with a bad batch. But to have that rate of failure, in fact, actually the last one that I just had, it failed just under 5 hours, about 4 hours and something odd minutes of active runtime, and it failed. So I looked at the situation and thought, right, well, I'm sure Seagate will eventually get it sorted, and these drives will become a more stable, more reliable drive. But for the moment, they're, as far as I'm concerned, useless when it comes down to reliability. The speed tests that I did manage to do on these drives is actually quite impressive for the price and for the amount of storage or data storage that you've got on the drives. Again, they're quite impressive. I mean, I had speeds right up to about 180 megabytes per second, which, on a single drive over a SATA 3 connection is pretty good, especially for, obviously in the UK price is less than £100. So, to get that kind of performance for much less than £100 in that density is pretty good. If only they'd actually work for more than 5 hours, then we might actually have something. Now, I thought, well, maybe it was just me, and again, it was a bad batch, but having a scan across the internet or whatever, it seems that quite a few people have been seemingly having the similar problems with, different sizes, different models of the drive, but obviously the similar technology, and they've been having particular problems obviously with the 3 gigabits and so on and so forth, which have been causing different things. From what I've also gathered is that if the SSD portion of the drive fails, or you get bad sectors in the SSD area, it's liable that the operating systems and the BIOS sort of areas of your computer won't detect the drive. The drive will be intermittent. It'll come in, and you might detect it at one point, and then it'll disappear out of the out of your file managers and BIOS setups. That is generally what I've found to be the case, because it actually has bad sectors. That's usually on the SSD portion. Obviously on the physical platters, that does seem to obviously only show up really in your smart error log, and obviously when you do a full disk surface scan to detect the errors, and obviously, as I say, if they are present, then it'll detect them, and it won't be able to read or write to those particular sectors. And for a drive that for 3 drives that have been less than 24 hours old, that to me is quite it's quite dramatic, really. But as I said, a small Google search proves that obviously I'm not the only person having the difficulty. So what I thought I'd do is make a little video on obviously the idea of SSD hybrid drives is actually a very good one, especially with the current prices of how much it costs. So I do actually have a Corsair Force 3 SSD, and obviously, as I say, I use or I've now upgraded to the Seagate 2TB drives. I've got 5 of those running, and they do seem to be alright for the moment. I don't know in their longevity, but sometimes you get bad batches of Seagates and sometimes you get good batches. So it's just, I suppose it's the luck of the draw. You just got to keep testing them, and after a week or two or whatever, you generally know whether you've got a good one or a bad one. So anyway, beside the point, moving on, I was looking into actually making your own SSD hybrid drive. Now, though, that doesn't mean that you go out and you have to do a load of soldering and this, that and the rest of it. Obviously, it's a technology that's been around for, the past 4, maybe 5 years, if that. And I came across, when I was searching or researching this, I came across some very interesting and, to a degree, certainly shocking, discovery, which I'll come on to in a minute. But obviously, with the hybrid drives, we have obviously a beneficial improvement. Now, in Linux, or on the GNU Linux platform, we have access to certain programs which can build a SSD hybrid, or an SSHD, if we can call it that, which is 3 major programs which are listed at the bottom here. We have what we call Bcache, DM-cache, and Flash Cache. I only came across these obviously when deciding to actually use these myself, but again, they've been around on the in the playing field basically for the past sort of 4 to 5 years. Obviously, there is the known technology that Microsoft has used, which is I've forgotten what they call it now, but it should be down here somewhere. Host.require blah 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 blah. It's somewhere around here, but obviously, as I say, there is the particular whatever way you can use a there we are, Microsoft Vista. It's called Ready Drive, as they called it there. I knew it was around here somewhere. Obviously, that I did see that in Vista many years ago when Vista came out, where you could use a USB pen to boost your hard drive, your internal hard drive's performance, particularly for things like netbooks and so on, which do have, in a sense, a grind down in performance. They're not necessarily the greatest, especially if you're using a laptop which contains a Celeron type or Celeron based processor. They're not necessarily the greatest and fastest in I/O performance. But yeah, so we looked at these, and obviously, as I say, I went through them, looking at licenses, looking at the what's available with these, and starting with Bcache, which seems incredible. I mean, this one's actually got a tremendously large amount of features, which is very positive. Again, it seems like a lot more development through the community on this project has actually been put into it. And obviously, as I say, we've got improvements listed here, and this is obviously the wiki, so you can actually, go to the wiki on this. I also double checked on this what the license was, and this actually is, believe it or not, released under the GPL version 2, which is exactly the same license that the Linux kernel is released on. And considering that this is being ported into the actual main tree of the Linux kernel, it's pretty much, if you are running a Linux kernel, the chances are that you've already got this in the kernel. You may just have to actually turn it on. So yeah, this is probably, by the looks of it, from what I can gather, the most likely and probably the best candidate to use and set up in regard to making your own SSHD. And as I say, I am more prominent, in thinking that this is your best or better option, to start with. The second is, as we mentioned earlier on the other wiki page, is the DM cache. Now this is a funny one. Obviously, it has a shortish, well, they say shortish history, but it has a history, and obviously, as I say, it does stem from IBM, and I think this is the one that's forked from the IBM code that was made. But basically, yeah, so IBM have been playing with the technology obviously quite a while, and whatever, to this degree. This is also open source, but you have to bear in mind this one is actually released under the LGPL, which is a limited GPL. Doesn't contain all of the freedoms that the GPL license provides, and obviously it doesn't look to be quite as feature rich as Bcache. So this does look like a feasible one to play with, but I wouldn't necessarily think this one's too great in its sense. Anyway, moving on to the third one. Now, the third one is the most interesting of the lot. This is, called Flash Cache, which, obviously does exactly the same thing as Bcache and, doing Mcache, probably plus or minus a few features. But this one, interestingly, which is what I was coming up to, was developed by Facebook. Then it was released open source, but when I've actually looked at the license for Flash Cache, it's not open source. It's GPL version 2. Now you're probably all thinking, well, GPL version 2 is not open source. Now, open source, and this, it can get confusing, because open source was the name called to, or in a sense a trade name, used to describe BSD type licenses, the Apache type licenses, things like that. It wasn't a term used for the GPL license. The GPL license is a free software license that respects the full four freedoms to modify, change, do as you will, copy and share any of the work that either you do or has been done on it, but you must make sure that the person that you give it to or share it with also has exactly the same freedoms, so that he has the source code and can change it. The thing with open source is that yes, you can get the source code and this, that and the rest of it, but you are not restricted to having to, in a way, not restricted is the wrong word, but you are not forced to have to give the source code to the person that you share it with. So you can take a particular open source application, compile it, turn it into a binary, and then just hand your neighbor or your friend or whoever that program, and not have to actually give them the source code. So you can keep the source code back for yourself. So you enjoyed the freedom, but you have, in a sense, the right not to give that freedom to the person that you give the source code to, or sorry, the person that you give the program to, which sort of, is in a sense wrong, because if you get given the source code and the program and everything, you have that freedom. So why should you not not give the same freedoms to somebody else? That means you can take away, you then have the power in a way to take away those freedoms from the person that you're going to give the program to, with or without extra features, which, to me is quite, wrong in its sense. The fact is, if you enjoyed the freedoms when you first obtained the software, if you don't want to share that software again furthermore with the modifications that you've made, well then fine, you can keep the modifications back. But in fairness, you shouldn't be able to enjoy the freedom of the first set of source code and then take that freedom away from the person that you then distribute it to. So there's there's a small line, there's a very fine line between what is right and what is wrong, and this is pretty much what some people like Linus Torvalds has said, where why should you force somebody to do what they in a sense they don't want to do? Because if they don't want to give you the source code of their modifications to be passed on to the next person, then they shouldn't have to be forced to hand over that source code. But then that in a sense, by not preserving that freedom to be able to force the person to pass on that source code to the next individual, is kind of defeats the object of having the freedom there in the first place. You can imagine, like, the first person releases it free software, and then the next person who gets hold of it then closes the software, and then the project just dies, because from that moment on, the freedom then is not respected, because the second person who got hold of it decided to shut it off. So everybody has to go back to the first version, fork that to try and keep the freedom going, and hence you have multitude of different forked projects forked all over the place, not because people want to fork the source code, but because in a sense the license sort of had to force them to fork the source code, so that the other person that disagreed with the first person who closed the source off and turned it into a binary proprietary program had to go back, and obviously he didn't want that, so he had to fork the source code before he'd proprietarized it, so that he could carry on and continue. Obviously he doesn't then get the features that have been added by the proprietary person, and so on and so forth. You can see how complicated that could get, and this is the problem with open source, and what many people have been arguing about for years. But when something is released under the actual GPL, not the limited GPL or LGPL, but the GPL, version 2 or even version 3, then it basically means that you have the source code, you have the ability to change, share and do anything with that source code, but the actual GPL license also in a sense forces you to pass that source code on to the person that you're going to give the program to. So you go and you buy a television, and in that television it runs the Linux kernel. With the GPL license the way it is, then you want to change some part of that kernel running in that TV, so that, let's say for instance, you want IP tables running because it's an internet enabled TV. So you decide, okay, I want to enable certain modules that IP tables can use to secure and control and have more power over your data connection going in and out. You then go to the source code, you get the source code, you can change the source code, do whatever you want the source code, and actually compile the kernel, and then actually load that into your television, for instance, so that you've now got that feature freely, without restriction, without anything going there. And the point here is that the only way that you would be able to achieve that is if you had the source code to be able to modify what's in there. Now, the problem is that many companies use the GPL, and they take the GPL code, but then they'll add LGPL code to their programs that they put in there, or they'll use proprietary style licenses. And when you modify that kernel, the binary proprietary licenses that they use, on licensed programs that are in there, won't work with your newly compiled kernel. 9 times out of 10 they usually do, but 1 times out of 10 they break. And then you are in a sense forced. It's like the binary program that they've programmed in there forces you to keep the free software program the way it is, so you then are again locked in by that. So these are obviously very serious things, and something that you need to obviously look into when you start planning what new packages you look for, or programs or things like that you want to use. And this is what shocked me the most, because Facebook, as we all know, is the biggest, in a sense, organisation or corporation that collects people's private data and makes money out of selling them to whoever is the highest bidder for, who can utilise that particular data for advertisement or whatever it is that they can get, a bang of buck for your data, basically. So they're the biggest collective datas, and very closed, to the point where they don't, trust, their users, particularly on their website, to, have more control than is needed to achieve a social networking medium. So it seemed a bit odd to me, and a bit shocking, because obviously, as I say, they've developed a flash cache, which obviously they've used for the web servers at Facebook, and then they've released this as a GPL, not an open source, but as a GPL version 2, because the GPL version 2, if you go to GitHub, which this is the GitHub for Bcache tools, and as you can see, it's the general public license version 2, which is right here. But when we look at let's go in and stick this in to see how we can, because I've already done this, of course, but unfortunately, as I say, I've broke the search by doing another search. But here we look at the GitHub. This is obviously the source code for the project, based here at GitHub, and we can look down, and we've got everything in Flash cache components released under the GPL version 2. So it's the same license code as the Linux kernel, and obviously you can modify it and whatever, and obviously you pass the freedoms on, and so on and so forth. So it's interesting, and also, as I say, I found it quite surprising. I don't know. You might think, well, I'm just overreacting or whatever, and I don't know. But to me, that was quite surprising to see, Facebook actually releasing a project like this under the GPL version 2, actually respecting freedom. Something that is not seen so much on the actual Facebook page itself, because they don't really allow you to do much on the Facebook page, and if you do step out of line, they do tend to boot you off, ban you, or penalise you in some way, shape, or form with the website and your data and all your pictures and all this, that, and the rest of it that you've got on the site if you technically misbehave. So there's again other things like censorship and so on and so forth. If you think they don't happen on Facebook, then I think maybe you're being a little naive, because I mean they do. I mean some censorship does have to happen on Facebook, particularly evil, disgusting, vile type pages and posts that people do post. And will always post. You aren't going to get rid of them. In a sense, do kind of need censorship. So then, the person who's posted them needs to believe that it's still active, but obviously it doesn't get any coverage. So certain things like that, I suppose, do have a justification for a level of censorship. So it does exist, no matter how you look at it. But then, obviously, respecting freedom in the software community is quite it's quite an interesting jump. And but yeah, I mean, this obviously goes on to say that obviously there's a fork of the Flash cache gone into Enhance.io, which is developed by STech. Now they've taken a fork of it, okay. And it'd be interesting to see, because I haven't actually checked up on the license on this yet, but it would be interesting to see what license this Enhance.io has been released under. Enhance.io, I mean, it's Christ, they've wrote a long one. It's typical company. Nothing ever simple when it comes down to someone. I mean, S-Tech it's called. There's this person S-Tech who's forked it. Copying added GPO licenses. So this is GPO license version 2 as well. So they've taken it. They've obviously decided to respect the the license, but also note that it's valid of the GPO as far as the kernel is concerned. It's this particular version of the license, version 2. Yes. Well, there's the tiny. Obviously, I'm not going to be reading that all on, all in this video or whatever, but it certainly makes an interesting read to see what they're doing. We've got some other crazy ass things here, as I say, with all this lot. Well, they're starting to push on copyrights. The appropriate parts of the general public license, of course, the commands you use could be called something other. Show W, show C. They could even be mouse clicks or menu items, blah blah blah. That would make an interesting read. So it's possible to say, if you're interested in the SSHD hybrid cache type thing and making your own, for instance, like I'm planning on doing, and starting with an existing project rather than actually trying to write your own from scratch, which to many people, including myself or whatever, as a single individual may seem quite a bit too much. Obviously I haven't looked into this too much yet at the moment, so but when we look down things like this, we have the licenses we have to look at when we start playing with this stuff, and obviously you can go over it and take a read of this if you're obviously if this is something that you're looking into doing. But it's interesting to see that obviously Facebook released their software on the GPL version 2, which then obviously got forked by S-Tech Incorporative into the Enhanced.io, which again is interesting. So there's plenty of reading material for anybody who really wants to look into this. And you've got the obviously DM cache. DM cache is this is LGPL licensed, so it's basically a limited. It's in a sense better than the open source license, but it's limited, so it allows certain non GPL type things. The GPL is obviously the better or the best one, to use. And obviously, as you can see, the reason why it is because it's got more corporations attached to it, and they don't seem to be wanting to help the citizens of the world out for free. They want to get money out your pocket if you want their help, which is fine. That's just up to those what they do. Some of us are not selfish, and some of us are. So yeah, it's one of those things. Now, where was it in here that didn't actually state the license as a limited GPL? Somewhere, I can't remember where exactly it was. Let's open up one of the I think this is the part of Python script, looks like it. File command directory, yes it is. The file is subject to the terms and conditions of the GNU Lesser General Public License, which is the LGPL. If it doesn't state it in the README documents, actually take a look at the comments in the header of one of the source files. It's usually a good idea to look at that, and you can actually see where the license is. Being as if it's got anything that's forked from Bcache here, or whether it's forked from the flash cache, then some elements of the source code is liable to be GPL version 2, and some of the source code is probably going to be LGPL, maybe even of a different license, because sometimes you can license, you can have multiple licenses to one project because somebody's adding their own code under their own license to say for instance an existing GPL project. So it's an interesting one to do, but as I say, the one that looks more prominent and promising is actually Bcache, but I'm definitely going to be playing with flash cache. So there's going to be some more. I'm going to make some more videos basically on both of these, and see how they go, see how easy they are to actually configure and set up. If they obviously require me to go in and actually start doing some hardcore stuff or whatever to get them working, then that's what it'll take. And I'll do a video which regards that as well. So yes, just some interesting thoughts for you regarding the situations on SSHD type drives. I'm sure Seagate will eventually get these drives sorted, but again, looking from the searches on Google or whatever, it seems like they've been having particular struggling problems with these drives for quite a while now. So I'm not sure, what they're doing and what their manufacturing processes are. They say that they test them fully, this, that, and the rest of it, but really, if they tested them really properly, then they wouldn't have broke in such short time in the customer's hands. So anyway, beside the point, I shall leave all you good YouTubers to it, and I shall speak to you soon in the next video. Take it easy, have fun, don't do anything I wouldn't do, which leaves you pretty much very little, but hey, makes a good saying. Anyway, thanks a lot my good YouTubers, and take it easy, speak to you soon.